Okay, we are live. So I'm going to hand it to the moderator.
Hi, how are you guys?
Good, how are you?
Awesome. Okay, so if you're ready, we can start. So the first part talks about taking turns to describe physical or cognitive domain intervention assignment from lesson 11 and 12. And then if your partner from that assignment is present, you can do this together. So maybe we can start with you guys. Grace and Stacy, did you guys do your project together?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So maybe you guys can go ahead and describe how that went for you guys.
Okay. Stacy, do you want to talk about like our risk, and then I'll talk about the intervention that we chose?
Sure. We chose the effects that electronics have on the cognitive development for 6 to 11-year-old children. And we talked about the fact that electronics are really prevalent, and they've changed the way that we have our personal interactions with each other. And the effects that they're having on children are that sometimes they are not developing well cognitively because they are only using electronics. They're not, it keeps them from developing other parts of their cognitive abilities because of the excessive use of the electronics. Because they don't learn how to do problem solving. They don't know how to do more than one thing at a time, because other than the electronics, because they don't know, they haven't physically done something else with their brain. They also get bored really easy, and they don't do well with bored time because they don't know how to use their brain to think of things to do. And we directed our intervention and our presentation towards parents, because they are the ones that have the most effect at home on their children and teaching them what's appropriate and what's not. And if parents are the ones having excessive screen time and not having interactions with their children are going to be doing the same things they are. And then, Grace, if you want to talk about the intervention.
So the intervention that we chose, there is a called Technology Fast that was created by Dr. Victoria Dunkley, and she wrote a book about this. And basically the premise of the Technology Fast is for 4 weeks, you are to eliminate all technological gadgets in your home, like cold turkey, get them out. And this includes cell phones, tablets, video games, computers. But she did say that it's okay to have some screen time, some TV time, as long as it is done by the whole family. And then she says that the benefits for the intervention is to reset the brain from the negative impacts of the technology overload. She mentioned a lot of like kind of scientific names of how the technology affects the brain. And so if you do this fast, it resets the brain so that it will work, it functions better without that influence of technology. So some of the people on her website said that it has helped them. Our focus was cognition, but this fast that Dr. Dunkley have not only affects the cognition, but it also affects behavior. Like she talks a lot about if you have children that have behavior issues, have the ADHD and this in the autism spectrum, she says that this can help with that aspect as well. There are concerns that we have with this intervention, and the first one is that it will be hard for a child to translate that technology fast outside of the home, because we know that a child can use a technology at school, at the friends' houses, all sorts of places. So that will be hard to control. And then that's what, and another thing is we talked about how some of the issues, cognitive issues, is not just, the cause is not just technology. So that's where we talked about the ecological theory and how just one microsystem, it does not, it's not the causation of a problem, that we have to look into the whole chronosystem of an individual so that we can see the issue there.
Awesome. Thank you very, very much. That was very informative. I like that you mentioned that, like, as you were talking about the fast, that my first thought was, how are they going to be able to do it outside of home? Like, for example, in my job, I have to be on the phone all the time. I have to be on the computer all the time. So it's nice, but how practical is it as soon as you leave the home? Are you still able to not use technology and things like that? But it sounds like it's a...
She talks about, in her book, there's a chapter there that she talks about how a parent can work together with a school to not eliminate but reduce the kids' use of technology. So I guess the whole thing about her book is that if you're a parent and you're doing the technology fast, you can be proactive and take that knowledge or your concerns about technology outside of the home. But there is that fact that it cannot be eliminated throughout all of the areas or the places that the child interacts with.
Awesome. And did you guys try it with your own families?
No.
Not yet. Half of them are gone. I guess they're kind of doing it,
yeah,
because they are gone. Where they have no, they're out camping for 3 weeks, so there's no.
Oh.
I thought that it would be hard for me to do that because, like what you said, it's kind of hypocritical for me to tell my kids, you have technology fast, and yet I spend like 5-6 hours on the computer doing homework. Yeah. So I'm not doing it right
now. Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to live without it, but thank you very much for sharing. Justine and I were partners and we talked about bullying. And Justine, I just wanted to find out, do you want to talk about the problem and I talk about the intervention, or do you want to talk about,
one is fine. Whatever you feel comfortable with talking about, Ayanda.
Okay. Okay, I'll talk about the actual problem of bullying. It's just, it's a big problem. And it affects children all around the world, and some of the research that we did was focused on that it's a universal problem. It's not just a problem that affects one area in the world, but it affects children everywhere. And some of the things that I was personally reading about and that we talked about is the fact that the process that bullies go through in order to find a victim, and you know, they usually go after the kids that look a little bit passive, and it can take many shapes and forms. And something else that I thought that was very interesting is that bullying is not only a problem because it's done to children and that they experience it, but adults don't primarily recognize that it's a problem. So teachers, for example, take a long time to intervene because, first of all, they're not paying attention and they don't realize that children are being bullied. Second of all, they don't know how to differentiate between the types of conflict that children are having. So sometimes they may see a child fighting and they may interpret it as normal, just childhood fighting or friendship fighting, but they don't realize that that's a form of bullying. And so the most difficult part for teachers, and our project was based on helping teachers. So most of all, we tried to figure out how they saw bullying. According to a study that was done, it was found that most teachers interpreted it way wrong. I think it was like 75% of teachers interpreted the bullying wrong, and they thought that the children weren't being bullied when in fact they were. So that was just something interesting that we found. Like, first of all, how big of a problem it is, and then second of all, how difficult it is to identify. So it's difficult to solve because it's difficult to identify.
One of the interventions that we found was they called it Achieve, but it was called a Stop and Think. That they were trying, so we focused more on the cognitive rather than the physical bullying, although there's different types of bullying, which I found that were very interesting. Only one of them was physical and the other three were cognitive. And but like I said, it's called Stop and Think. And they're trying to get the teachers to actually stop and think about what is actually going on between the students, and then also to teach the children to stop and think about what they're doing before they do something. So there were a lot of results that were kind of mixed, like Ayanda illustrated. Something I found that was interesting was, gosh, I'm trying to think, was there was more success when the administrators were involved. So if it was just one teacher trying to fix this whole thing, it wasn't going to happen. So it was when the administrators got involved in the situation and made kind of a whole school-wide policy that they were able to be more successful in what they were trying to achieve. And it was also having more interaction between the teacher and the students, because if the teacher knows more of the students, then they can pick up on some cues that they, if they're in trouble or there's going on. So whether they're the bully or whether they're the actual victim. But it was more of a teaching the teachers to be proactive before something actually got worse. So.
Nice. Thank you very much, Justine. Thank you for describing that so well. And then the next thing that we need to talk about is the social and emotional domain intervention that we researched this week, and whether we've been able to implement it in our lives and to address the problem. So who would like to go first with regards to that?
I can.
Thanks,
I chose anxiety, and kind of defined it as it's an adaptive mechanism, which is normally a good thing unless it's used in excessive lengths of time, or in situations that are actually harmless, or when there's no apparent reason for it to be triggered. And that is an actual problem for a lot of children, is anxiety. And behavioral and cognitive interventions were the ones that talked about being the most successful for anxiety. And I didn't realize that cognitive behavioral therapy actually encompasses a whole bunch of different kinds of therapy. And there's a couple that worked better for children with anxiety. And the one I wanted to talk about was called stress inoculation training. It kind of sounds not very pleasant, but it actually works pretty well. It helps the children to deal with different situations that they encounter that cause them stress to the point where they have anxiety attacks or get really anxious. And it teaches them coping skills in safe, low levels of stress, so that they can then apply that to higher stress situations. And they go through 3 phases to do it. And the first one is conceptualization. The second one is skill acquisition and rehearsal, and then the last one is application and follow through. So in the conceptualization phase, they think of situations that are stressful for them, and they think through and talk about why it's stressful to them, and then they talk about how the situation, they try to get them to think about why they're reacting that way, and then they talk about how it really is not stressful, to try to get them to think through that their thinking processes, that, oh, that really is not something that's going to hurt me, so I don't know why I'm being so stressed about it and getting so anxious. And then they help them to understand that those negative reactions that they're having aren't going to help. So then the next step, the skills acquisition and then practicing, or the rehearsal, is that they teach them coping skills that are appropriate to the different kinds of things that make them anxious. And then they teach them things to do to relax, such as deep muscle relaxation, different things to release their tension, meditation, things that can help them to calm down when they do get anxious, and help them think through what they're going to do. Then they actually have them apply it. That's the last phase. And they practice applying those coping skills that they've learned. And they start on low levels of stressful situations for them. And they role play what they're going to do. Then they're given homework to do at home and wherever they get stressed. And they do it gradually so that they build up a tolerance, or they build up the coping skills to be able to deal with more stressful situations. And they keep doing it until they are able to apply those coping skills in any situation that they can. And they come back and they talk about how successful they were, what didn't work well, and what would work better, so that they can continue to change it so it works for them. And there was something, a quote I wanted to, but I can't find it right now. So they found that it works really good for all kinds of different situations, as long as those that are helping them actually help them think through the same situations they'd be dealing with. Because if they teach them different situations that they're not going to be dealing with, it doesn't do any good. So they actually talk through situations that they've had or things that they think they might encounter. So, and no, I have not had a chance to fully practice it. I didn't realize that I did some of this stuff with one of my children that has anxiety, but I didn't realize that the other parts of it, that I didn't know about the intervention before until now. So when that child comes back, I will be trying it with them to see if it helps the rest of it. Because I've been able to talk to them about situations that stress them out and talk about things, oh, is that really going to hurt you? How is that going to hurt you? And they're like, well, no, not really, but, and then we talk about the but, why it is that bothers them, and then talk about, well, what can you do? So now I need to, when they come back, try practicing the rest of it with him so he can do better. So.
Can I ask 2 questions?
Sure. I don't know if I have answers, but.
So first question is with the CBT. Was there like a time frame? Like, you know, if you have your kid go through this therapy, is it like, you know, X months or however much they need it, you know? And
it's pretty much however much they needed.
Okay.
Because some kids are going to be able to deal with stuff quicker and be able to learn those coping skills. And if their anxiety is higher, it might take a lot longer.
And then is there like, do you find any in the research where it's, because I just think that, you know, anxiety, it seems like it has gone up in the last decade versus, you know, the past few decades. Is there a causation for that? Like, is it our society? Is it just because our kids have different challenges now than 20 years ago? Or
So my opinion, it didn't say, because most of this was older. It's one that's been around for a long time, but they didn't say about more recent stuff in it. But my opinion is that a lot of kids do not have a lot of physical activity, which helps a person relax because of one of the things they did say in a different cognitive behavioral therapy was aerobic exercise helps a person be able to kind of calm down. I mean, you physically are working out, but it helps you to relax yourself afterwards. And I think actually our intervention that we talked about, a lot of kids are now they're bombarded with electronics, and it's nonstop busy, it's constant. And so if you have something constant and busy all the time, you start getting more and more anxious inside, and it's hard to calm yourself down. And I think that's the way a lot of things are in society now. It's fast paced, it's go, 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 there's no relaxation time. And part of that, or the SIT is what they called it, the stress inoculation therapy, that one of the major portions of it was teaching them relaxation techniques so that when they have been in a stressful situation, they know how to calm down and to just relax and to let everything go and then be able to start over. And I don't think that happens a lot. So I don't know if that answers your questions or not, but
that's good. Thank you.
So.
Okay, who wants to go next?
I'll go next. So the topic that I chose is bullying, and I focused on the, of course, the social and emotional aspect of the risk of bullying. So the first one that I found, because you had to have two research peer sources. The first one is a research, and it's called Bullying in Elementary Schools, Its Causes and Effects on Students. And it's a research from Pakistan, but I found it really interesting because it had a lot of information about bullying. So like what Ayana was saying before, that bullying comes in different forms. So some of the forms of bullying that was mentioned in this research is that insults, name calling, nicknames, hitting, direct and indirect aggression, theft, threats, exclusion, isolation, verbal abuse, gestures, destruction of property, rumors, putting down, sexual harassment, dating violence, and cyberbullying. And then it also talked about there are 4 different theories that causes bullying. And I found it interesting because I just think that bullying is, well, basically before I did this research, like my thoughts on bullying is very narrow-minded. But then when I read about these theories, it's like, oh, I guess there's like so many different aspects that could cause bullying. So the 4 that they talked about was the group dynamics perspective. That one means that the victims are seen as a threat to the group integrity. So if you think about a group, and like if you think about like a school group, if they have this idea that this should be our group, our group needs to be upper class and white, and all these descriptions, and then you see this person that maybe he or she is not of the same socioeconomic status. So the bullies will think that you are a threat to the group integrity. So you become the bully. Is that what they call them? And then there's the socialization practice, where the cause is that the bully wants power. And then there's the group process, where in the bully situation, there are different roles that are assigned to people. And so there's the bully, there's the people that are just looking on, and then there's the victim. And then there's also the cognitive view of bullying, which means that I guess children are very susceptible to this because of their immaturity. Like their cognition hasn't developed yet where they can gain skills. And so some of them, because of this immaturity, they reflect that in their aggression. And then also in this research, it says that there is research proven that there's the bully cycle, where the bully can also be the victim in different situations, and then it could cycle where the victim could be the bully. And that is affected by socioeconomic status, gender, and physical health. And then it talked about a few different interventions. And then it also had a study where the study that they did was just asking questions to people, and then they rate to see. They had 4 different questions, and then their goal was that they could figure out what the people thought, what the causes of bullying were, coping strategies that people usually do, and then the conclusions that and the recommendations that they could get from that. So the result was that males and females have different perspective of the causes of bullying, and then they also have different coping strategies. The ignoring is mostly done by females than males, and then helping in one way or the other is more done by males than females. The recommendations as far as the school environment is that, like what Ayana and Justine said, that it's better if the school administrators are cooperating or are doing something, and not just the teachers, and that the teachers need to have an open communication with the caregivers. So anyways, the intervention that I found was that in University of Northern Iowa, they created an inclusive dance company. This is UNI students are paired with K-12 students, both with and without disabilities, and come together every week to dance, improve confidence, and boost self-esteem. Their main emphasis is inclusion. And then they had in January, they had a basketball game, and this group danced there, and then they have a good, a wonderful result to that. And the reason why I chose this intervention is because it shows inclusion, because you include kids with disabilities and without. And then I also think that the concept of having a mentor for these young kids, being that the college kids are the mentors, I think it's really good for their self-esteem, boosts their self-confidence, and also it shows that like outside of their peer group, you have this bigger group that you can be friends with. Because I think that's what a lot of the kids need, is that they need to understand that, because some of the victims, they just think that this is the only world that they have, their existing peer that they have. But if they go out of that, then they will be able to find that there are other people. So that's my.
Yeah, I got your message. So why are you taking it, Tim?
Thank you so much, Grace. Bullying is, for me, like one of the most,
I'm good at,
like the scariest thing I've been through before, and it's a difficult thing to get through and to get over in the future. I think, like what you mentioned, is sometimes the victims can be the bullies themselves. I won't say that I was the bully, but I know that I am incredibly defensive now because of the experiences that I've had before, So I'm just like, no one messes with me type of thing, because I don't want to have that experience again. And it was more of an emotional than a physical thing. And when you read about it, like, okay, so the typical victims seem like this and this and this and this. It's just such an interesting thing. But like if people could just be more vigilant, especially adults, they would be able to see those situations more, and sometimes to be able to help those bullies out, because I know for sure that the people that bullied me in school were having serious problems at home, very, very difficult situations. And so that's what makes it easy for me to forgive them, but it's just difficult because they were grown-ups in the situation and they could have intervened, but they didn't. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. How about you, Justine? What was your problem and intervention?
So my risk was along the same lines of what their intervention was, as I talked about the media and how it affects relationships. I have a good friend who and his mom's relationship was really affected because media became the babysitter. So, but anyway, so I found 2 research articles, and one of them identified 3 different forms of parental involvement with the media. They called it overall as parental mediation, is what they called with mediation. So, but they only looked at 2 of the 3. They called it active and restrictive. Kind of goes along with what Stacy and Grace's intervention was. You can be active was to just discuss between the parent and child what they were watching. So the parent's not really watching it, the child is, but the parent's asking, well, what are you watching? You know, trying to figure out what they're doing, what video game they're playing, whatever they're watching. Restrictive is limiting the amount of media that they're watching. So there are, they gave different strategies that the parents can use, but one was, but the one that didn't give any, not a lot of influence, they called it deference. So where the parents know what they're watching, but they choose not to do anything about it. So kind of a little bit like permissive parenting, kind of alluded or similar as that too. It was important. Oh, hang on, I totally skipped. It's important that parents really need to know what the kids are viewing and what they're watching on television or on the computer screen or whatever, and how much they're watching as well was important. But what I found was interesting is they put a lot of the focus on the moms in this situation, because that's who they interviewed in the study, is they interviewed the moms. And they found the moms that were, that were associated with some sort of religion or watched television themselves made a big difference in how much television or media usage the kids did. So, here we are, doing all this online studying, and so we have a lot of screen time. And so it kind of, to them, well, mom's doing this, so I can do this. But those that had religious involvement actually watched less television or interacted less with them, which I thought was interesting. And so they limited their their kids' media usage. So we kind of, so something I got from the study is that as moms, or as, the main person that's at home, we kind of set the stage for how much media our children are going to use. So, but it also, depending on how much they watch when they're younger, translates to different, it could translate to other issues as they get older. Those that used a lot of media and watched a lot of television, some of them would be a little bit more aggressive and more outspoken as they grew up into adolescence. And so their belief system was a little compromised because they believe the things that they're seeing on television and interpret that into their life. And so it's really kind of important to monitor and to limit what they're doing as when they're young. The second study that I found was, it was a study that was done in the UK, United Kingdom, but they used a lot of similarities that they had here in the US. So they had some really good points. Like, everybody's heard of the Baby Einstein videos. There's so many people, because they focused a little bit on infants and younger kids. So it was two different age ranges. So that's the only bad part where I was a little, but they said even though it's educational, it's too much. Like Stacy was saying, they get overstimulated and they can't figure out how to calm their minds. They said even having the television on in the background is a distraction. And then the other thing is, even when you turn the television off, you have to do something. You have to interact with the child. You can't just turn off the television and expect them to just flip the switch and just go do something else. You have to interact with them. But the biggest thing that I took away from this, it was, and the quality. The intervention that Grace and Stacy talked about with, you can have a minimal amount of screen time, but do it as a family. That can be less harmful. So, but yeah, it slows down the learning process, like Stacy said. And it's not supposed to be used as a babysitter. They need more one-on-one. Just for Pete's sake, get on the floor and play with the kids, or figure something and go run around outside. So there's plenty of other things to do rather than screen time. So I think time we have, I think we'll all be thankful in the long run of what happens. So, but that's mine.
Thank you so much, Justine. And technology is so dangerous because it's like I usually let my kids watch maybe one show a day, but I've started to notice that immediately after the next show, it doesn't show credits anymore. It just shows the show that's coming on next. And then they want to watch that one as well. So they cry when we turn this one off. But I think it's so evil of them to do that because they're tempting the kids to do that. So now you have to turn it off like a minute before it finishes, because if you don't, then it's like it shows the next show and then it's the next one. And then before you know it, they've been watching for 2 hours. And it can be used as a babysitter because you're sitting there thinking, okay, they'll just watch this one, but then you get distracted as well. So technology is dangerous because of the little subtle things that are involved in there. But I liked the solutions and the interventions that you provided for that, especially like the restrictive one. And I think it is true that if we as parents kind of like defer or are permissive and don't act, we're not, and mothers as well. Like that touched me a lot because, we have a big responsibility as mothers, and children watch us and they emulate what we do, and hopefully they learn from that example and that it's a positive one. So thank you very much, Justine.
Justine, can I ask a quick question? Why was religious affiliation make moms use media less? Just curious.
sorry, I've got too much going on. I don't know why they studied or why they incorporated that. It was just I think it was kind of from a research standpoint, they were trying to separate more of the type of mom. Does that make sense? So we're just trying to be a little bit more specific. But yeah, I thought it was interesting that those that are religious, you know, because whether you're LDS or some other religion, there are a lot of really good moms out there that are stay-at-home moms that regulate what they watch and how much they watch. And so I think it was just a different aspect that they were just trying to look at. But I don't think it was necessarily them specifically targeting that. I think they were just trying to separate the different types of mom. But that was just one that just kind of just, I was like, well, I'd never really thought of that. So because there's certain things that I watch and definitely things that I don't watch. So because of that.
I'm wondering if it's because of values too. Usually those that are religious actually try to have certain values, and they have certain morals and standards that they want to live to. That was just a thought that came to mind. And that might influence. So
that makes total sense. Thank you.
And I actually wanted to ask, like, as moms and as religious moms, do you guys feel like you are a little bit more restrictive with, first of all, what the children watch and how much they watch? So that's the first question, like, are you more restrictive? And then the second question is, what do you do in the time that you do turn off the television or technology and all of that?
I had to get very restrictive with my kids. During the school year, is not off or not on. It is only on the weekends. There's no television on a school day, because if that thing's on, nothing happens. Very, very restrictive. And in fact, my son, when he was younger, we would watch certain shows and he started acting out. And so after that, I said, nope, done. So I'm pretty restrictive. My kids, there's job in this house, period, dot. So I can't stand it. It's horrible. It's disgusting. And so, my kids, they just don't. So they know what shows they can watch and what shows they can't watch. And if there's some things where it's just like, really, do we have to watch this? So, and I also use, I've told my kids the two questions from Elder Bednar's quotes, things as they really are. If it impedes the Holy Ghost or the Spirit entering our home, you don't need to watch it. And I forgot what the other one is. I'm drawing a blank. But that's something that we really, and then like I was talking with Stacy's post this week on our discussion board. I hate it. It's distracting. So, and I try and minimize taking my phone to church because it's just too distracting. So if I don't have anything going on, then I usually leave it at home. Encourage my kids to do the same thing because we're there to feel the Spirit. So so I would consider myself to be pretty restrictive.
We try to do just active. We like to play board games. That's something we like to do as a family. Or my kids love science experiments. My mother-in-law every time she comes over, she's like, what have you been doing now? Because there's always something on the table that looks like some kind of weird growth or something, because they've been doing some kind of science experiments, and we like to do those together. We also like to go out and just go for walks or play around in the backyard with the dog. We live on an acre, so they have lots of chores and helping weed, and so we go out as a family and help take care of the chickens, or we just go outside and do a lot of different stuff. So just about anything and everything except for electronics once they're off. So.
Well, for us, we do that too. We do board games, we go for walks. But I'm just going to be real to you guys that we are not as restrictive as you guys are when it comes to technology. I don't want to use my school as an excuse, but that is one big factor. Because before I went to school, like I was the fun summer mom. You know, we had a list and we do things, and my kids can attest to you that their summers were really fun. And I actually, before I started school, I used to do craft camp. So I actually, for a week, I have my kids and other kids in the area come and spend 3 hours in my house doing crafts. Like that was, I was doing it for like 4 years, but then school came and then everything halted. So, I'm not very good. What I do remember is, when Justine was talking about being active and paying attention to what your kids are watching or what they're doing, that's what I'm trying to do. And one example of that is, so we have Netflix, and, the Netflix has two choices. You have the kids and you have the adults. And so the kids, being the naive mom that I am, I just thought, oh, all the cartoons in the kids one are good, right? Well, there was one time I think my kids have been watching, what is that show called? Forgot what it's called, but it's this cartoons that had like two like worms or maybe insects. Oh, I forgot what it's called. Larva. That's what it's. Okay, so the show was Larva, and my 3-year-old would say, "Oh, I want to watch Larva," whatever. So I put it on, and then I walk away. And then there was one night I sat there, I watched it with him, and I was floored at the crude humor. I mean, super crude humor that it was just like, what are we watching? And so from then on, I said, no more Larva. I don't care if it's on the kids section of Netflix. No more of that. So that's what I'm trying to do now, is be more active, because I know I don't have the time right now to be restrictive, but I am active.
That's good, because I've noticed a few times that we went over to my mother-in-law's house to watch something, and she'll put oh, this is a really good show. And the first 2 or 3 minutes, I'm like, turn that off. And she's like, why? She's become desensitized. She doesn't realize that, because I pointed out, she's, I didn't even hear them say that. And I'm like, I did. And my kids certainly did. So you have to be really careful. Even Larva, which has no words, was horrible. So.
Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah, there's certain, my 10-year-old will watch, but when the 17 and the 15 and the 13-year-old are in the house, she's somewhere else. So, because she doesn't like to watch half of the things that they do. So, and they know that. And so even when we're on family trips, it's okay. We have Ellie in the car, so we can't watch these certain shows because it doesn't work for her. Yeah, so like my 13-year-old loves Hunger Games, but the 10-year-old can't. She's just like, can't do it. So yeah, so they try and find things that they can watch together, which they do. So, and it all works out. But no, I totally.
That's awesome. Well, thank you very much for sharing all of those things. I think it's just amazing to hear like the different things. And I suppose we all do the best that we can with what we know. But I think the most important thing is that as long as you're being vigilant as a parent, that's the most important thing. I just want to talk about my problem and the intervention. So the problem that I chose was peer pressure. And it's just something interesting that I thought, because as I was going through the different problems, it came up as something that does affect young children as well. So one of the first sources or the articles that I read was talking about an experiment that was done in adults first. So they started, it was called the Ash test, and it was done in the 1950s. And basically it was an experiment where each person did a test, and then they put the answers down on a piece of paper, and then they had to recite the answer out loud. And people recited the wrong answer because the majority recited the wrong answer. And then they did the study on a group of 4-year-olds, and they gave the majority of 4-year-olds like a set of pictures that was correct, and then they gave one of the children a set of pictures that was incorrect, and or like 1 in 4 children. So they'd give like 1 in 5, sorry. So they'd give 4 the ones with like the correct format of pictures, but when they asked the children out loud, because the group said one thing, even the child that knew the difference between, like they put animals, and they said, turn to page 1, and everyone else's page 1 was a mom and a dad, but the one child's page 1 was like a dog and a monkey. And even though the child knew in their mind that it was a dog and a monkey, they answered it as a mom and a dad because the whole group said that. And so it just illustrated the fact that peer pressure is dangerous, and it can even begin at a young age. And so that was just like the initial thing. And then the other research that I did on this topic was just why the reasons for peer pressure and the effects that it has. So it happens obviously because children want to form friendships, they want to form relationships, and as they get older, between the ages of 9 and 11, their friendship matters more to them, and it's more of like an emotional experience. And some of them are experiencing puberty and might experience peer pressure because of that, and of autonomy for them. So the reason why it's difficult for them to report to their parents that they're struggling with peer pressure between the ages of 6 and 11 is because they know that they're trying to build their own situation or their own reputation for themselves. So there's positive peer pressure, which means that if children have the correct types of friends, then they're able to interact correctly and grow and learn. But there is the negative peer pressure, which is the most common one that we know, which means that the children are affected negatively by it. And then I found a few interventions. Like there wasn't like one specific thing. I tried to look for like one specific program or thing that it used, but as I was searching, I found similarities or specific points that kept coming up. And a few of the most important things that were presented as interventions was, first of all, the responsibilities. This is a problem that parents need to face head on, and parents are responsible to ensure that, first of all, they know their kids' friends and that they know their kids' families as well, so that they can know the type of people that their children are interacting with, and then in addition to that, they need to help children understand their own sense of right and wrong. And in order to do that, they need to teach children to be confident and to be assertive. So those were the 4 most important factors that I found. So first of all, parents knowing their children's friends and families, knowing their children's friends, knowing their children's families, and meeting with those families, and then helping them develop a sense of right and wrong, and then helping them knowing how to stand up for what they believe in. And they can do that by fostering confidence and assertiveness. So those were some of the things that I found. And again, it was just shocking to me to see that peer pressure can start at a young age. It's not only when teens are learning how to smoke, but it's just little things and little behaviors that can affect children badly over time. Oh, and I wanted to talk a little bit about how one of the interventions. So my oldest boy is 4 years old, and he doesn't fall in like the gap that I was studying, but I still tried to implement this with him. He has a friend who is incredibly aggressive, and my child is one of the most kindest, most charismatic children that you will ever meet. Like, everyone that meets him just loves him. And he just started being aggressive, and we noticed that he was behaving that way because his friend was aggressive, and he has behavioral problems and things like that. But we started talking to him about it. We started talking to him about recognizing what's right and what was wrong. And we used one of the, there was a home teaching message a couple of months ago that helped us do that. Like, and it had a little bit of an activity where you could pinpoint whether this is right or this is wrong by the way that you feel in your heart or by following the Spirit. And as we did that, and as we helped him overcome or see his sense of right and wrong, he started influencing his friend for the better. And now his friend is so much better. Like, it's just interesting how it did. It was like a complete turnaround. My child is back to the way that he used to be, and his friend is still aggressive, but not as bad as he used to be. Like, he's not as bad as he used to be, which is something that I'm grateful for, that he's no longer affecting my child badly, but that it's like my son is influencing him positively.
That's great, Ayanda. Your story about your 4-year-old all of a sudden being aggressive reminded me of my daughter too. Sometimes it's interesting how they can be chameleons, because my daughter is like that too. She's such a sweet girl, but then she had this one friend, was actually our close next door neighbor, but they moved already. But when she is with that girl, all of a sudden she gets snappy and sassy, and I was like, oh, where is this coming from? And it's because that's the attitude that her friend had. So it's interesting how they're chameleons. Whoever they get attached to, that's who they are too. It's interesting.
And why is it they always seem to pick up the bad habits instead of passing on the good ones first? And we have to address it that way, because I've had my kids do that too. I'm like, wait a second, that's not who you are. Why aren't you being the one who's influencing them? So I guess that's the way life is.
Great point, Stacy.
Thank you, guys. And then the last thing that we just need to do is just to share highlights from the domain interviews that we conducted with our caregivers during lesson 11.
Okay, I'll start. So there are just 3 things that I would conclude with the interviews. First is that I thought, and the people that I interviewed thought, that the questions were a little bit ambiguous. They're very broad, because I asked my sister, who is 40 years old, and then I asked a good friend of mine she's in her 50s. So both of these women are older, mature. They have kids. My older friend, she's a grandma, so she knows this. But then I asked her the questions, and she would just stare at me blank, like, what do you mean? What are you trying for me to answer? So they had a hard time really understanding the questions. And I was kind of hesitant to kind of go deeper, because I don't want the way I ask to affect their answers. You know what I'm saying? Because I know what I would answer. How would I answer that? And so I didn't want that to influence their answers. But turns out that that's how it was that's how it resulted, because we just thought that the questions were very ambiguous. The second thing was that the big strength in all of the issues, the risks that we talked about, is child's resiliency. It could be their physical resiliency, cognitive, or how their brain works, but it accounted for all domains. And children can bounce back easier from risk with proper intervention. And then the third thing is that the parents are the best people to provide the intervention. Their strong influence in the child's life provides them with the best position to make a change. So those are the 3 things that I would say that I got from the interviews, besides all of the risks that we talked about. But I didn't add that here because I've already done that in the discussion board, and
Yeah, and I think the parents too, not only it's because they're consistent. They're there all the time. Teachers are there for part of the year, part of the day, but parents are still there every single day, every weekend, all year long. And I think that made a big deal, because that was one of the things that was common in mine too, is parents are the ones that, even if they're not able to do the intervention, such as if they have a physical disability or a learning disability, that they can help at home with it, but they're the ones that need to also advocate to get that help when they know that their children need the help. If they cannot provide something for them, they're the ones that need to go out and get it for them. And yeah, all of my people were like, those are really hard questions. This sounds like it's something for a professional to be asked, not just normal parents. So, and their interventions, a lot of them were tailored specifically to different situations, or was what I found with each of the answers, because the things that they talked about were people that they knew, and so the interventions were just tailored to those things and were not really general, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, the thing that I noticed with my interviews is that it was very easy for them to come up with problems and the situations, but it was very difficult for them to come up with the interventions for those problems and the strengths for that. So that took like a longer time to figure out than, okay, this and this and this and this and this is a problem, but this is how we can solve it. And I was just thinking about it, and I pondered about it a little bit more, and I was wondering, I wonder if it's difficult to find solutions, because sometimes both of them were the parents of the children that they were talking about in those various ages, and coming up with an intervention or a solution kind of puts you in a position to act on that as well. So it gives you the responsibility to do that. So it's very difficult to say, my child is obese and I need to eat healthy and exercise as well so that my child can do that. Because if I provide that solution, then it means that I have to do it as well. And it might be difficult to come up with that solution when I know that it's a problem for me as well. And so, or technology, like, I can say that technology is a problem. Oh, these kids are so lazy because they're always on their phones, but coming up with a solution or an intervention that says cut off technology for 2 weeks. Can I even do that as a parent? And maybe it's difficult to provide that solution because parents know that it's difficult for them to do it as well.
For me, I talked to a teacher and then a parent. And this teacher, she was my daughter's teacher last year, but we're still really good friends, but also has a son that's in this 6 to 11 age range. And sorry, but she was awesome. I looked more at my friend who's a teacher of things that she did. Had probably the best point of view on a lot of these things. She didn't struggle with the issue or anything. She talked about how some of her students had a hard time sitting for hours on end. And again, it goes back to what you were saying, Ayanda. You have to know the parent, or maybe it was Stacy. I can't remember who was saying, but you need to be involved. So this teacher really works on developing a relationship with her students and with the parent of the student or the parents or guardian or whoever. And so she had one student in particular that had a hard time sitting still, and I can't remember, but instead of having them focus on trying to sit in a chair, she would just put them off to one of the classroom, still where they were involved in the class, or on the backside somewhere where they were a little disruptive, and just have them stand. So, and they had the option to sit or they had the option to stand. And so it really, she knows that they need to be physical and they need to be active, and the only way for their brain to work and to function is if they're more physical. And so she has a bead jar, and I hate the Cohen book, by the way, but she has a bead jar that when they do things, they put the beads in their jar. And so when they fill up the jar for their reward, it's usually something physical. It's not a treat or watching a movie. It's usually going outside, spending more time outside, because they need that. They need to get up and they need to move. She also knows that, you know, and that's where it comes into that competitive nature, because she's a 6th grade teacher. So they have that competitive nature, and she sees it more in the boys than she does in the girls, which goes along with the bullying issue. There's more aggression with the boys than there is with the girls. So, but again, it goes into that they need that physical outlet where they can just go and just move. And there's like a healthy way to do a competition, and that's why she does the jar thing. So to kind of alleviate some of that. But again, it really, and she also knows that because she knows her students, different students have different reactions to different people. And they're going to feel more comfortable. Like there was one kid where he was having a bad day and she could see it. And the person on the playground couldn't, you know, she couldn't have handled it the way that she did. And so she knew exactly what this young man needed. Whereas, and the other thing was the on-duty recess person knew that. So, and knew that he would feel more comfortable with her. So, so you really have to get to know is comfortable, or even where your child is comfortable. I know there's situations and things that happen even between me and my husband and my kids where it's like, yeah, this is a dad issue, because it's going to go in one ear and out the other with when I say it, but when their dad says it, we're all good. That's different. You know, for my oldest daughter, I can get through the 17-year-old, but my son, forget it. He prefers dad. So it just doesn't. So it doesn't work like that. But both my friend who's a parent and the teacher said a lot of it is a healthy environment for the kids. And it starts with the parents, whether they're together or whether they're not together. If you can figure out how to co-parent, I think that's the biggest thing right now with so many divorced families, is you need to figure out how to co-parent. And it still creates a healthy environment for these kids where they still feel comfortable. But when you have both home and school and everything in unison, you usually have a healthier kid. So.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for your insights. Like, it's just so interesting to see it all from like different perspectives. But I think one thing that I picked up on is there could be 100 problems, but on the most part, those solutions need to be individualized. And the importance of parents is like such a common thread in all the things that we've all mentioned. So parents play a big role in all these problems and in all the interventions. They play a great role in that. And there's just 2 more points that we need to discuss. So we need to attempt to identify common elements of effective interventions targeted to different problems in different domains.
I think you hit on part of it, is that it has to be individualized. That is the one thing that, even though there might be similar interventions, or I guess many different interventions that are used for similar things. Each child is different. And so what works for one will not work for another, even if they have the same issues, because of the child's temperament or their family situation or experiences that they've had in the past. I think that, I don't know if that makes sense, but if we have a whole bunch of interventions to choose from and we know what the child is like and what they're struggling with, then we can tailor it more to their needs rather than just having a blanket intervention that, hey, this is going to work for this issue, but maybe it doesn't for that child because they have other things that are going on as well that is affecting it.
I also think that the best interventions, I think we read that in, I think, the chapter 13, is that interventions that include all the influences in the child's life. Like, you know, when they said that the best intervention cannot be like just the therapist and the child. It has to be like the therapist talking to the parents and the family incorporating whatever the therapist does in the office. They do it at home too. So I think for me, the best intervention would be the one that involves all of the different microsystems that is within the child's life.
Yeah, I agree with that, Grace. You need to have, I mean, there's so many, you know, what your kids go through, or Stacy's or Ayanda, what any of your kids go through is going to be different than what mine are going to go through. And I think it's also, you also should include life experiences. So, because, I mean, I grew up with a dad in the military. My kids grew up with a dad in the military. So we move a lot. And so, you know, not everybody does that. So making those transitions, it's hard. But sometimes you have to do a different type of intervention because of the different life experiences that they have been through. So I think that also, and that goes back to Ayanda's point of it has to be individualized.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. And I suppose we've already shared this, but it says that we should conclude by sharing our best general insights or suggestion about effectively intervening to foster optimum development. And I think that you guys shared such awesome insights with regards to that and how important it is to make sure that whatever problem it is solved specifically tailored to that child. And that helps, I suppose, not putting too much pressure on the child. And it looks like the only thing that we have to do now is just summarize the highlights from our intervention and just include what we've learned and the conclusions that we've drawn.
All right, batter up, right? Sorry, I've been taking notes. Ayanda's better at this, hands down. Okay, so summary is, so we talked about our interventions that we did for our assignment, and Grace and Stacy did the electronics. We're focused on the cognitive of children of 6 to 11. They don't develop as well. They can't really problem solve and they get bored too easily. They geared it towards parents. One of the interventions was a 4 weeks that eliminates all electronics and you minimize the screen time for only family time, which is to help reset the brain. This helps with those that have ADHD or trouble focusing or any sort of aspect of that, autism as well. It isn't just one problem with one system, but multiple ecosystems are involved, and it's hard to apply because we spend so much time on the computer. Whereas Ayanda and I's was about bullying, and we talked about the different forms of bullying and how it's rapid growing problem, and everybody faces it. We talked about the cognitive intervention of stop and think, and we geared it towards teachers and administrators, and it's more successful when the administrators and teachers are involved. And we're trying to change how the teachers are addressing the issues, and also the students. Our individual studies that we did, Stacy studied about anxiety, how it's an adaptive mechanism, and they use cognitive behavior therapy, or CBT, that is most successful. And then you have a 4 to 5 step process that they call stressful inoculation, and that helps them work through the stress or anxiety. They talk through situations, and there's no really set time limit. There's less physical activity, and so there's not a way to calm the brain down. So it's something that's why this might be happening. Grace was about bullying, and you have different forms of bullying. You have 4 different types of theories about the causes of the bullying, and you need to be, it's how informative are people around each of you of whether you know whether you're a bully or a victim or transitioning in both, but you need to be aware of who are around you. The form of intervention was to have inclusion and mentorship. And then mine, we talked about the media usage and trying to minimize the media usage that you have in your home, whether it's restrictive or active. And then we talked about the different ways that we are monitoring our kids' media usage. Ayanda talked about peer pressure. And we go with the group even when we know it is the wrong answer. There's both positive and negative peer pressure. It just depends on who our peer group and who we interact with is. We need to be more involved in our kids' groups of friends and also their families. So the last part were more of our individual, or things that we found and other things. With the questions and the interviews, the questions are a little too broad, and they were hard to answer for some of us, or for some of the people we interviewed. Children are really resilient. Parents are the best to intervene because they can advocate for their own children. It needs to be tailored to individual situations. To come up with problems, but hard to find solutions. Solutions need to be individualized, and they need to include influences in our everyday child's life, and life experiences can play a role into their life.
All right, great job, ladies.
Thank you. Thank
I
you.
think that's it. I will hit the stop broadcast, and then I'll probably won't send you guys the link till this afternoon sometime. But as soon as I made sure that the whole thing was published, then I will send it to you, and then I will submit it as well, making sure that I track where the time that we started for summary, because I know that's what Sister Huffaker wanted to make sure that we do that. So it's been great knowing you guys this semester.
Thanks, guys.
Right. Talk to you guys later.
Bye, guys.
Bye.